Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Effectively Manage State Licensing for Drug Distribution, presented by Cardinal Health. I'm Joe Keenan, contributing editor to Fierce Markets, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Our speakers today are Rose Azaro-Bass, Manager, State Licensing, Cardinal Health Regulatory Sciences, and Laura Feingold, State Licensing Specialist, Cardinal Health Regulatory Sciences. You can read their full bios on the right side of your window. Just a few technical notes before we begin. If you'd like to download the slide deck, please click the Resources List button at the bottom of your screen. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help button at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. We will follow the presentation with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Q&A button on the left side of your screen, and you can do that throughout the presentation. There is a brief survey on the right side of your window. Please take a few moments to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. Okay, I think we're ready to begin. Rose, please go ahead.
Hello. Here is a brief overview of our presentation for today. First, we'll discuss some various key factors in determining your company's state licensing requirements. Second, we'll provide an overview of 3 typical distribution models. Third, we'll discuss timing considerations to target a specific product approval or launch date. And finally, we'll wrap up our webinar discussion today with points on obtaining and maintaining your company's state licenses and thoughts on how Cardinal Health Regulatory Sciences can assist your company through the state licensing process. So, have you had this thought? Now that our drug product application is under review at the FDA, we can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Well, not quite yet. Many companies are surprised to find out that in order to distribute your product throughout the U.S., state licensing is required. Let's begin with a little background. So most states have licensing or registration requirements which have to be met before you can actually distribute your product. This applies to the distribution of prescription drugs, prescription devices, over-the-counter product, controlled substances, active pharmaceutical ingredients, or if you're planning to distribute physician or complementary samples. With the 2013 enactment of the FDA's Drug Supply Chain Security Act, several state boards of pharmacy modified their licensing programs to incorporate additional requirements. This was done to better ensure a safe and secure drug supply chain. For instance, in an effort to better align with the DSCSA, the Board of Pharmacy in the state of Iowa recently revised their application. What was a simple 2-page application with a single attachment has now become a 14-page application with detailed supplemental attachments. And the Idaho Board of Pharmacy, not wanting to be left out, also revised their application 3 times in a 1-year period. If you've spent any time reviewing the state statutes and rules regarding state licensure, you've probably come away wondering, do I need state licensing? And if I do, which states are actually required for my company? In order to help make that determination, ask yourself the following questions. How would I best categorize my company's business activity? What type of product will my company distribute? How will that product actually be distributed? What is the potential approval or launch date? And will my product be distributed in Puerto Rico? Your answer to these questions will ultimately determine if state licenses are required, how many state licenses are needed, and when you should begin the process to obtain your licensure. So we have a polling question, as Joe mentioned previously. And the question is, are you familiar with the term virtual manufacturer? We'll give you a few seconds to respond. Okay. So here are our results. 65% are familiar with the term, whereas 34, almost 35% are not. And we'll cover that definition a little later in the presentation. Laura will now discuss the possible answers to the previous questions.
Most of the states will categorize your company activity as one of the following. The following definitions are taken from various state licensing agencies, and I'm going to paraphrase them as this is a little boring, but we'll get through it. Manufacturer means a business engaged in the production, preparation, propagation, conversion, or processing of a drug or device, either directly or indirectly, and includes packaging or repackaging of the substances or labeling or relabeling of the containers. So think of manufacturers as physical brick and mortar facilities that may or may not be the holder of the application. Distributors means any person engaged in distribution, including but not limited to manufacturers, repackagers, own label distributors, jobbers, third-party logistics providers, retail pharmacy warehouses, pharmacies, brokers, agents, and wholesale distributors. And now the answer to our polling question. Virtual manufacturer means an entity that owns the NDA and or ANDA, but does not take physical possession of the drug or device. They contract with a contract manufacturing organization for the physical manufacture of the drug or device. So think of virtual manufacturers as the holder of the application that outsources the manufacturing and distribution of their product. Virtual distributor means any entity engaged in wholesale distribution of prescription drugs or devices. The entity does not own the NDA or ANDA and does not take physical possession of the products. However, they purchase the drug or device from a manufacturer, and they must be registered as a business entity with the FDA and must operate out of a commercial facility and not out of a residence or personal dwelling. So think of virtual distributors as an entity that is not the application holder, but subcontracts the distribution of the product. Third-party logistics provider, or 3PL, means an entity that provides or coordinates warehousing or other logistics services of a product in interstate commerce on behalf of the manufacturer and wholesale distributor, but does not take ownership of the product, nor do they have the responsibility to direct the sale or disposition of the product. The 3PL provides supply chain management to store and distribute products for manufacturers, virtual manufacturers, and virtual distributors. Have your eyes glazed over yet? Hang on there. We're almost done. Wholesale distributor means a person or entity other than a manufacturer's co-licensed partner, a 3PL or repackager that is engaged in wholesale drug distribution. In other words, wholesalers warehouse and ship product owned by the wholesaler and other businesses. A private label distributor is a firm that does not participate in the manufacture of a drug, but instead markets and distributes under its own trade name and labels a drug product made by somebody else. A private label distributor is responsible for the products it introduces into interstate commerce and for compliance with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requirements and current good manufacturing practices regulations. So private label distributors hold a marketing agreement with the manufacturer to distribute under the private label distributor's own labeling. So why is all of this important? How your business is categorized will ultimately impact the number of state licenses required and will determine which application will be prepared in that individual state. The application process is unique to each state. Many of the states have multiple applications to choose from. Some of the state applications will allow a company to choose more than one business category, while others will require a company to hold licenses in 2 separate categories. And yet, other state applications may only have one category regardless of your business operation. For example, in Georgia, although your company operates as a virtual manufacturer, the state identifies your company as a wholesaler, so that is the application that would be prepared. Your company's product type defines the state licensing requirements as well. To provide an idea of how many other state licenses are required for each product type, here are some numbers to consider. Note, these are just estimates and they can fluctuate based on where your facility is located. For self-distribution of a prescription drug product, 48 state licenses are required. If using a 3PL, that number is reduced to 28. For prescription devices, self-distribution requires 36, while using a 3PL requires only 21. Self-distribution of OTC products requires 15, and only 10 if you use a 3PL. API requires 26 with self-distribution and 13 if using a 3PL. 3 states license complementary samples, and only 2 if you use a 3PL. When using a 3PL, the number of required state licenses is reduced since the state will allow your company to utilize the licenses held by the 3PL. Many states are removing the requirement to hold a separate license for controlled substances unless the company physically handles the controlled substance and maintains a DEA registration. That ends our discussion of business categories and product type. Rose will continue our discussion to explain the impact of a company's distribution model selection.
There are a variety of distribution options. The examples provided here are based on a virtual manufacturer using one of these 3 distribution types, and it also assumes that you're distributing a prescription drug. There are 2 main third-party logistics provider distribution models. Both the title and traditional 3PL model services are offered at Cardinal Health 3PL in Laverne, Tennessee. The title model is often the choice when timing is critical. In this model, the 3PL, acting as a wholesaler, actually purchases the prescription drug, and ownership or title is transferred to the 3PL. In this scenario, the virtual manufacturer is required to obtain only 4 state licenses, one of which must be the home state. The home state is obviously the state in which your facility is located. You'll notice the slide has the word approximately. This is due to the fact that your company may or may not be required to hold a license in its home state. Some states license only certain business categories. If your company does not fall into one of those categories, your company will be classified as exempt. In the traditional 3PL model, the virtual manufacturer maintains ownership of the prescription drug. In this scenario, your company is required to obtain 28 state licenses, and as you can see, can take a significant amount of time to complete. If your company is utilizing a specialty pharmacy, the number of state licenses will be determined by the specialty pharmacy locations. Depending on the state, a separate license may be required for each location. If it is determined that your company will be self-distributing a prescription drug, nearly all states will require a license, and this process can take upwards of a year. So now that your company has defined their business activity, product type, and distribution model, the application process can begin. Laura will now provide some insight into a timeline to start the state licensing application process.
All right, beginning 9 to 12 months in advance of approval, identify your company's key personnel. Decide which of your corporate officers will be listed on the applications. In addition, choose a designated representative or facility manager. This person must be present at the facility during normal business hours. He or she must be a manager and oversee the day-to-day operations related to product logistics. The designated representative or facility manager must work at only one facility. If using a 3PL, now is the time to begin that selection process. Make a determination on whether your company has the required resources internally to complete the applications or whether it is best to outsource. Of course, we vote for outsourcing to Cardinal Health Regulatory Sciences. So you've probably heard about VAWD, and you're wondering, does my company require VAWD accreditation? We'll discuss this area in greater detail a little later in the presentation. At 6 to 9 months in advance of approval is the perfect time to submit your application to your home state. The home state license certificate will be attached to most of the subsequent state license applications. If your state deems your company is exempt, an exemption letter may be used in place of a home state certificate. Complications arise if your home state requires an FDA approval letter or device clearance prior to issuing your license. When this is the case, your timeline will be adjusted since your company won't be allowed to apply for your company's home state license until the product is approved. Additionally, now is the time to select a commercial registered agent. Many states require these providers to ensure local representation to receive service of process if a lawsuit is initiated in a state where your product is being distributed. Several states require that your company register as a corporation with the Secretary of State. This simply allows your company to do business in their state. Numerous states require fingerprinting and background checks. This process can take additional time, so it's best to get started sooner rather than later. If you've chosen to outsource to Cardinal Health Regulatory Sciences, as a courtesy to our clients, we prepare the fingerprint cards for your officers to take with them to be inked. If your company does not have standard operating procedures in place, now is the time to begin preparing those as well. 3 to 6 months in advance of your approval, your company should have their home state license. Submit the remaining necessary state license applications to states that don't require product approval or clearance. Your product is now approved, so the remaining applications should be submitted. If submission to your home state was delayed due to an approval requirement at the state, now is the time to apply. In this scenario, to make up for lost time, the 3PL title model may be your best choice. Remember, in addition to the home state license, only 3 other state licenses are required. If the product is to be distributed in Puerto Rico, now is the time to register there. The Puerto Rico registration is product-specific, meaning each strength and packaging configuration of the prescription drug, device, or OTC product must be registered. The product may not be distributed until a certificate of registration is received from the Puerto Rico Department of Health. This process may take 1 to 3 months, but has been significantly delayed due to the after effects of last year's hurricanes. So as you can see, there are many preliminary details that must be implemented in order to stay on track. As promised, Rose will provide information on the VAWD accreditation process.
VAWD stands for Verified Accredited Wholesale Distributors. This accreditation is governed by the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. At present, only a couple of states require this accreditation to obtain their state license. The process includes a detailed review of your company's SOPs and quality system, with an emphasis on compliance to the FDA's Drug Supply Chain Security Act. In addition, your facility will be visited by an auditor of a VAWD inspector. The initial accreditation requires a 6 to 12-month commitment, as well as annual renewal is required and reaccreditation occurs every 3 years. The entire state licensing process can seem somewhat overwhelming. If you choose to outsource, the state licensing team at Cardinal Health Regulatory Sciences is here to walk your company through the state licensing process. The process is collaborative. We strive to make the application submission as painless as possible. Through our initial discussions and kickoff meeting, we will obtain a better understanding of the unique details of your company, product type, and distribution plan. The information you provide will assist in determining the number of required state licenses. In addition, a Cardinal Health state licensing specialist is assigned as a liaison between your company and the state agencies. We develop a strategy based on timing and specific needs of your company. Ongoing communication is critical to the success of your state licensing process. Information is shared between your company and a Cardinal Health state licensing specialist using a secure SharePoint site. We cannot complete the applications without the information provided by your company. With each completed application, a detailed instruction letter is provided outlining required signatures, fees, and how to actually submit to the state agency. Our goal is to minimize the time and effort required from your staff. Once an initial application has been submitted, the Cardinal Health state licensing team tracks the review process at the state agency and will assist with providing any clarifications or additional requests by the state. Based on our experience, here are some pitfalls that can cause a delay in the issuance of a license, some of which can be avoided. When your company receives an initial application for submission, it is important to finalize and submit the application in a timely manner. Part of our overall strategy has taken into consideration the timing of the state's receipt of that initial application to work best around the state schedule of renewal periods and board meetings. If fingerprinting is required, ensure that the technician obtains clean and clear prints so they won't be rejected and have to be redone. Of course, some delays are unavoidable. For example, if there's a backlog at the state, or as mentioned previously, when there's a home state requirement for an FDA approval letter. Unfortunately, if these issues arise, your company is at the mercy of the state. So once you obtain your first state license, you have to start considering the maintenance of that license. Renewal applications are required on an annual, biennial, or anniversary date. Some of the states will send out notifications by postcards or email of the pending renewal. Other states do not, and you're kind of on your own. As part of our maintenance services, renewal dates are monitored and tracked in our electronic database. Depending on the state, the renewal may be completed via a paper application with a wet signature, while other states have an online renewal. Now, the online renewal often includes uploads of supplemental documents to the state licensing website. Our services also include providing updates and revisions to the state to advise of company changes, such as new officers, location changes, updates to product type, etc. Many of these company updates must be reported to the state in a timely fashion. Depending on the update or change, the notification may take place during the renewal. For some changes, a new application must be submitted. If, for example, the facility moves or changes ownership, since these licenses are non-transferable, a new application is required, and it may also include new fingerprinting and background checks. In order to maintain compliance with the continuously changing state licensing regulations, the Cardinal Health state licensing team monitors the state agency websites. This is to gather information on new requirements and revised applications, forms, and/or procedures. So, in summary, we have discussed the importance of defining your company's business activity, product type, and distribution model. These factors ultimately determine a state licensing strategy and timeline to obtain the necessary state licenses. We also discussed the collaborative effort between your company and the Cardinal Health state licensing team. And finally, we provided some insight on how the state licensing team will maintain and monitor your licenses to maintain compliance. So what's the bottom line? Be proactive. The fact that you are in attendance at this webinar is the first step. Once it is determined that state licensure is required, make those critical decisions regarding outsourcing, distribution, timing, and strategy, and your product will launch on time.
Rose-Laura, are we ready to move on to Q&A?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Just a reminder to the audience, there's still time to submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And also, remember, take some time to fill out the short survey on the right side of your window. We have a lot of questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. First question up is from the audience. On slide 18, standard operating procedures are mentioned. What is addressed in these SOPs?
Good question. So not every application requires SOPs, but there are a handful of states, and it seems to be a trend that more and more are making that a requirement. Of course, each of the states has a list or has a few that they require, but they're primarily around drug supply chain type of issues. So, ensuring that you have some sort of a recall procedure, or that you might have something regarding natural disasters, or that you might have something regarding theft and diversion, something along those lines. It's very specific in the application what's required. Sometimes you have to actually attach the procedure, and other times they'll take you on an honor basis, and if you say that you have the procedure, they'll assume that you do actually hold that procedure.
Can you guys expand a little on Puerto Rico, as post-hurricane it's still kind of a confusing situation down there?
Certainly. So they do have power back at the Department of Health. For a period of time, they were without power as well. So they have a backlog. They had a backlog due to that initially. However, it still seems that what we used to see turned around, in maybe 3 to 4 weeks is now taking closer to 6 to 8 weeks. So basically, you're submitting all of that information, and then you have to wait. Ultimately, a certificate is provided by the Puerto Rico Department of Health, but you're not allowed to distribute product into Puerto Rico until you actually hold that certificate. And if you recall from our discussion today, each product has to be registered. So if you have a product and it has multiple strengths, each of those strengths has to be registered.
Are there different requirements for manufacturers that distribute animal health products, dietary supplements, and homeopathic products?
The applications occasionally will include veterinary drugs, but I haven't seen any of the others.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Are there ways to expedite license application processes at the state levels?
Unfortunately, no. We try to time our licensing to avoid some of the problems that could happen at the state. The state, gets backlogged with their renewal period, and some of the states have big renewals at the beginning of the year, and other states have a large renewal number at the end of the year. We try to time our submissions to work around those heavy, busy times for the state, but unfortunately, there really isn't a way to, it's not like Amazon where you can say, deliver this in 2 weeks. You're basically at the mercy of the state and how they work through things. Some of the states, the clerks are quicker at reviewing. Other states, it has to go before the board, and they meet, quarterly or every other month. So there really isn't too much we can control with expediting, issuance of certificates.
Which state takes the longest to acquire?
That is a common question. Again, if you can avoid the renewal period or try to hit the board meeting just right, so your application is ready to go for consideration by the board. If you can avoid those 2 areas, then I would say we're looking primarily at the states of Florida if you're a wholesaler, or California if you're a wholesaler, for the longest time to get approval. And it's not really the application process per se. In both Florida and California, you're required to become a certified designated representative. So there's an additional application and certification that has to take place for both of those states. So that can often delay your licensing as a wholesaler in Florida or California.
So what type of information do you need for the applications?
Well, it really varies. Again, each of the state applications are different. So for some of the states, I would say most of the states, they're going to want to gather corporate business information, find out details about where your company was incorporated, tax IDs, and things along those lines. Where some of our clients run into a hiccup is the information that's often required around the officers and designated representatives. It's a lot of personal information. They'll ask questions like the date and place of birth, your Social Security number. They'll ask a number of moral turpitude questions. So oftentimes, we get a little pushback, but it's information that the states require, and if that information is not submitted, your application will not be reviewed. They'll often ask about your business activity because, again, they want to ensure that you're making the right application. And some will ask questions about your product list or details if you're utilizing a CMO or 3PL. They'll want to know if you have an actual agreement in place and things along those lines. And some of the states actually will even ask for photos of your interior of your facility as well as the exterior of your facility. But again, it really depends on the individual state.
Can you give an estimated cost to obtain initial state licenses and renewals?
Let's see. Well, we can't really talk about the cost from a Cardinal Health licensing perspective. Obviously, we would love to talk to everyone about that in a more private setting. But we can give you an idea of the state costs because each of the applications is to be sent in with some sort of a state fee. Now, if you're assuming that, let's talk about a virtual manufacturer, let's say, that's planning to distribute a prescription drug and they're going to use a 3PL. So in that scenario, you're looking at about 28 state licenses. Now, those initial applications are going to probably run about $16,000. And then, as I mentioned, once you obtain a license, you're looking at a renewal. Sometimes that renewal will happen at a one-year period. Sometimes you'll renew biennially. Some are on even years, odd years, and then others are just on an anniversary date. So your first year's renewals would be around $6,000. Your second year renewal is going to be a combination of the first year, 1 year renewals as well as the biennial renewals, so that's going to cost you around $13,000. And then your third year renewal is going to be around $7,000. But again, the prices change. We just received a notice that South Carolina is about to increase their rates, but that won't happen until 2019.
Do I need additional state licenses for each new drug approval and launch?
Not necessarily. So if your product is essentially the same product type, so if you had a prescription drug that you were distributing and you had a second prescription drug that was approved, your licenses are current because the license is actually to your facility for that business operation and product type. Now, if you were to add, say you were distributing over-the-counter products, and now you have a new product that you're planning to distribute that is a prescription drug, there would be some additional licenses required, and you would have to update the licenses that you currently held to inform them that now you're also distributing not only the over-the-counter product, but the prescription drug. Again, Puerto Rico would have to be, you would have to register that new product with Puerto Rico because, as you recall, with Puerto Rico, you're actually registering every product.
Is there a way to shorten the time to obtain the state licenses?
I think we already answered that question.
Yeah. Not really. I mean, like I said, we time our submission to the states to work around their heavy periods. So, the only thing we can recommend is when we send you the application filled out and ready to go, that you scramble and get the checks ready and signatures ready and send it off right away. There's sometimes a delay in getting signatures from the officer that should sign, and he's out of the country or on vacation or something. But it's really important to jump on those right away because in our kickoff meeting that we mentioned, we have figured out a strategy for the best time to submit these applications. So, it really is, there really is no way we can say, please do this right now.
The other key there is oftentimes an application will be submitted and the state will have a follow-up question or ask for an additional document. And if no one is monitoring the email that was provided in the application and those questions are unanswered, they'll put your application at the bottom of the pile, and until they're contacted again, your application will just sit idle. So you want to try to avoid that if you're in a hurry to get your license and be, attentive to that email or that contact information that was provided and respond to them as soon as possible.
All right, Rose, Laura, this looks like this is going to be our last question. We had a lot of great questions today. Unfortunately, can't get to them all, but we will be getting back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. You've pretty much touched on this, but is there any additional information regarding fingerprinting and background checks?
Absolutely. Most people haven't done fingerprinting, which is a good thing. Yeah. So that is an area where we often get a lot of questions. So first of all, not all the states require fingerprinting. Some of the states will have a background check maybe that's not a fingerprinting, but again, not all of them. In general, there's a couple of ways that the fingerprints are obtained. If the state has a requirement for like a paper wet inked fingerprint card, we'll actually help prepare those cards and provide them to you with instructions on how to obtain the best print. There are local sheriff's offices or police stations where you can take those paper cards and you'll pay a fee, and there'll be someone there, a technician, who will actually prepare the inked cards with you. Other states actually have what they call a live scan. And with the live scan, it's more of an electronic picture, I guess, of your fingerprints. Again, there is a fee involved, and if that's the case for your state, we can provide some area locations that are close to you to obtain those prints. Now,
if it's okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So some of the
go
states, you actually will use a third party, and they'll process your prints. For other states, you actually submit the cards with the application. And again, there's additional fees that are involved in both of those scenarios. And not everyone has to be fingerprinted. Primarily, it's the designated representative at your facility, and sometimes it might include some officers, like the top 4 or 5 officers at your facility.
If it's okay with you guys, I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in. Can you apply for the certified? Can you apply for the certified designated representative certification for Florida and California before applying to the state license to expedite the process?
Yes, actually, you have to in both circumstances. As I mentioned, that certification can involve passing an exam or taking some additional training. And all of that has to be done in advance, and they have to actually approve whom you've selected as your designated representative. They will oftentimes receive a certificate, and that particular certificate information is sent along with the application. So you ultimately have to do the designated representative piece first, and then it's submitted with the actual application.
And that was our last question. I'd like to thank the audience for attending this Fierce Markets webinar and thank our speakers for participating, as well as Cardinal Health for presenting today's webinar. A reminder, the webinar has been recorded, and you will be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.